Halloween 2019. I am still up winter camping at St. Vrain State Park, and it has been chilly. Tonight is supposed to be 0. Feels like a Minnesota winter out here by the lake. I made my mom watch the Blair Witch Project the other night, which made me think of doing a bonus Halloween demo called the Blair Stitch Project. And it inspired a new design of the mini mess kit that I shared with the TQS audience when I did my segment with them. This is such a great way to use up bits and pieces of like this and that, just little yards of things that you have lying around. And then when you're done, you've got this little tool pouch that I just could not live without. It holds like my glue, my scissors, my chalk pencil, my Frixion, a little ruler, just all the things that you reach for as you're sewing. I mean, definitely use up things that you have. That's what these are for. Just little ideas for you to kind of use up your stuff. But if you want to take and make hand stitch project all ready to go, you can grab a kit on my Etsy shop and follow the picture there, or just make up your own. You know, if you're using stash, basically what you're going to want is 2 pieces of felt, wool felt, and 2 rectangles of fabric for the lining, and all of that, each of those should measure 3.5 by 4.5. 2 yards each of like 6 or 7 different DMC flosses. Have one of them be shiny just for interest. I've got a sparkly thread. My favorite is Ricky Tim's Razzle Dazzle. About 2 yards of that. 4 yards of like an 8 pearl cotton to do the blanket stitch around the edge. That's how we're going to stitch the bag together. This is all a hand stitch project. And then 5 or 6 different fabric scraps that you can fussy cut and collage with. And then, of course, just a few different kinds of beads that you have lying around. But keep those small, like size 11 seed beads, as it's such a small scale project. We want to make sure everything's staying in scale. We'll be working with raw edge applique. So if you added interfacing to the backs of your fabrics before fine cutting your shapes out, that would be helpful to stop most of the fraying. I put interfacing on the backs of all the fabrics in the kit, so that's done for you. And what I use is Quilter Select Cutaway, which is one of my favorite one-sided fusibles, as it's really easy to hand stitch through. There's really no pattern to this so much as I'm just going to sort of demonstrate some of the stitching that I do, kind of the thought process of designing it. And I'll just work through it so you can have some ideas of what you might want to do with some bits and pieces of this and that that you have lying about. So the first thing you want to do is just grab one of your pieces of the wool felt and start kind of playing around with the elements that you've cut out of your fabrics. I'll put the tree down, and I'll make it similar to the one that I did. And then the top you're going to fold down under 1/4 of an inch. So just stay away from the 1/4 inch of all the sides. Okay. And maybe we've got an owl kind of facing this way, so we'll put the clock on this side this time. And then last time I separated the bugs, so maybe I'll have them climbing up, following each other, climbing up the wall. Little love bugs in the night. And then we're gonna play around with that. You know, just get a composition that you like, that's pleasing to your eye. There's no real big rules in this one. This is just such a small, tiny piece, and it kind of gives a fun way to start playing with composition. And of course, you know, we're going to turn, all the stitching is going to make such a huge difference because we went from this to this, and the stitching is just what's so fun, and I think, like I said, what really makes the piece. That while you're thinking about how you want your design layout, you could take care of the boring part, which is stitching the lining. And so how you do that, this bag incidentally also serves as my needle and pin holder. This is the back of it. If you don't have the color thread with you, a great idea is to use one single strand of DMC floss, which is what I'm doing here. Because for some reason I don't have black with me out here in the woods, so I'm going to use my little piece of DMC. And then to hand stitch, I tie a quilter's knot at the end. I did one, but I'll do another one for you so you can see, just in case you don't know what that is. 1, 2, 3. And pull it until there's a knot on the end there. And then put your 2 fabric pieces right sides together and decide which one you want to be the top. And a scant 1/4 of an inch, which means within a 1/4 of an inch, just starting at the very top, Just take tiny little bites of fabric. And I'll take 3 stitches at a time. And just stitch your bag together. Of course, you can do this by machine if you're sitting at your machine. This is very quick to do either way. Sometimes I find it's just faster to just sew the darn thing together than to go get in my machine and set it all up and all that good stuff. Okay, so get that lining done. You're basically just going to sew all the way down to 1/4 of an inch, all the way 1/4 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch at the top, and then leave the top open. Once that's sewn together, I'll show you what to do with that. Okay, once you find a design that you like on your collage piece on your front, you can tap a dab of glue, although I find fusibles and glue don't work really that great on wool. So I find the tiniest pins that I have and just pin each little element in place. Take this extra step, or just really quickly stitch each one down along the edge, just because we're going to be couching and stitching on them. And yes, we could just leave the pins in and work from there, but honestly, it's more enjoyable if all the edges are sort of pinned down and you don't have to keep worrying about your thread getting caught on pins, and it really just doesn't take that long. What I did on my first bag was I used invisible thread. You can use just a clear or a smoke color, but of course I don't have that up here with me, but I do have this spool of Quilter Select poly threads, which are really strong and really, really thin. So the goal is just obviously not to see it as best you can. I'm coming up right along the edge of each piece, and this thread will get covered up. Stitching into the background of the felt and then maybe coming up 1/4 of an inch. And you know, honestly, if you come up 1/4 of an inch and go into the felt and go down into the applique piece rather than come up through, I find I get less thread fraying rather than come up and try to find the right hole. It's just easier to go straight down into it. See, even with that, I'm getting that caught on every little thing. And then about 1/4 of an inch away, you know, really what we're doing here is we're just tacking. So don't go too nuts and spend too much time. You know, you don't have to go every 1/8 of an inch or anything. Just every 1/4 of an inch is fine. And so for every piece, just stitch all these down. Okay, so I've got everything all tacked down, and now we can begin the fun part. It doesn't really matter where you start. You know, as you stitch, ideas will come. So if you're just kind of looking at it, not sure, just start with something really easy. So I'm going to start on the tree because that is really one of the easiest places. I've got 2 strands of DMC floss black knotted on one end. I'm just going to throw in some branches, just sort of give this tree some life. This is what I did on my first one. I really like the way it came out, so I'm not going to make any changes. And as you can see, I'm doing a really long stitch here. Just come up. Right, come back up through here, sort of at the bottom of a branch. And for every branch, I'm going to do big stab stitches. You can go right in the middle of them. I thought it was kind of pretty to go on the side. It's sort of like it's a bit of a shadow here if you can leave some of the background showing. And then for every branch, just run 1 stitch. And then when you're at the edge of the tree, I just take it all the way into the felt, which holds that piece down even more. And since I'm right at the edge of that felt, I'm just going to pop over into the felt itself and then come up here. When I have an arc, like in this branch, I'm going to do that in 2. So it looks more branchy. And then come here at the base of that branch. And then work on this branch. So you can see it's just very easy, big stab stitch embroidery. And that kind of gives that tree just a little bit of definition and some life to it. So I've got all my branches on, and then the other thing I did was I just took little snippets everywhere the tree sort of dipped in with black, just little black lines in there. It helps hold the piece down and puts a little bit more definition. So now I'm going to work a couple French knots in here. So they sort of look like little nighttime blueberries, or should I say boo-berries. 1, 2, I'm just going to do 3 stitch ones, 3 wrap French knots. And the secret to French knot, of course, is taking that yarn and pulling it under the needle. Insert that needle right next to where you were coming out of, and hold that as you pull the thread through. And of course, we can be as messy as we want on the back because we're going to line it. Okay, so work those blueberries, and then with 2 strands of black. These were done with the Pearl 8 cotton, by the way, the one that we're going to do the blanket stitch to get the bag together. I'm going to work on his feet a little bit. And kind of just satin stitching here, I don't have to go too detailed. And then I came up and just did a couple stitches in his beak. I'm going to go ahead and do the Roman numerals, just run over them basically. 2 strands of black still. I'm just going to do the 12, the 3, the 6, and the 9. And I've gone over the hand, the big hand and the little hand. Just kind of same thing, you're going to just take the point, work it down to this widest end here. Right across on the other end, up to the point, and then somewhere maybe 1/8 of an inch down, just come back down. So the hands have a little bit of extra texture. Okay, so let's work some beading. Right in the middle here, I'm going to put a flat bead and a little 11 seed bead on the top. What I want to do is not go through the 11 seed bead again, that's my little holder. I'm just going to go down through that first bead again. And I've got you could do beading thread here, but I've just got a poly thread that matches the background. And I want to show you how to put a string of beads on it. This is a great method if you want just a nice stem of beads, a trail of beads that stay pretty much where you want them to go. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is just come up. What I'm going to do is put gold beads all around this inner circle. So the first time you come up, put 2 beads on. Lay them across your fabric, and just with your fingernail, push down where you want that to go, and that's going to happen. It's going to end up just on this side of that watch hand. So we'll come up on that side. String 2 more golds on. Use your thumb to hold that bead thread taut, and then insert the needle back down into the fabric just on that side of the bead. So to really lock these in place, and how you get a nice even row of beads onto a fabric, is you want to come up between them, straight up between them, insert your needle into the last bead strung, string on another bead. Okay, hold your thread down and pop that needle back down into the fabric. And that's basically how you do a string of beads, just a perfect strand. I'm coming up between those 2 beads now. Go into the last bead strung. And another gold bead, and use the needle to push that bead down. so you know where it's going to end up, and then put the needle right down into the fabric. Those beads will make a nice arc along this circle. Remember to stop right here and pick them back right up here, and obviously stop here. Okay, so we're going to couch around the outside of the clock now. There's a couple different ways we can do this. We can either use a yarn and just hold it in place while we stitch around it with sewing thread, or what we're going to do here instead is make little stitches that we can weave our threads into. So we're going to come up through the felt only on the side of the clock and work a little bit of just like 1/8 of an inch stitch. Putting the stitch into the applique. And make sure you have one coming out of every number. And then in between the numbers, whatever you have space for, I'm just going to do 2. Just sort of evenly spaced in there. Once you have your stitches all the way around, now you can just weave your yarn in behind every single one. And what we're going to do, what I did, of course you could do anything you want, but what I did was I did 1 row of the light color on the inside of this tan, and then I took the darker tan and with 3 strands went through all of them again on the outside. Okay, so to finish off the outline of the clock, once I've got my 2 strands of the lighter color here and then 3 strands of the dark, I'm going to go on the outside of these stitches again, but this time after you come out of each stitch, go through it again, pick up the next one, and sort of try to stay on the outside here so the little knobs go towards the outside. And then what will happen is on the stitch that you're coming out of, you have a little knot there, a little knob. Okay, so I'm coming out of this stitch, and then just make sure your thread is laying on the outside. Come around it again, and then into the next one. See how I'm staying on the outside there. And you can just use your thumbnail to push that knob to the outside. Okay, so I want to show you another little way to add a little sprig of beads here. So I'm coming out one of the knots of these adjacent little stitches I made to couch over. And I'm going to pick up 3 beads, kind of a square crystal and 2 gold beads. And incidentally, I am on 2 strands of DMC floss, black floss, or whatever your background color is. All right, and so once you get those 3 on, you're going to lay it flat in the direction you want to come out. Hold it with your thumbnail. And then pop the needle back down into the background fabric. And to hold this deeper in place, come up just on the side in between the first and the second bead. On the other side of the thread, pull really slowly and make sure that that sinks down in between the first and the second bead. And they're going to do the same between the second and the third. So you're going to come up between the second and the third bead, and then go down on the other side of the thread that holds those beads in place. So coming out from a number, and basically I'm just stabbing that knot we made on the outer wraps. All right, so we're going to take these little bugs and turn them into scarab needles. I've already done this one down here. Okay, and this is basically the thread of the razzle dazzle. And just work on his back. Take the next one right next to it and just above so that we form a little arc here. And just work slowly with this stuff so it doesn't tangle. Put it right on the line, right next to that next thread where the white ends. Okay. And then just right next to it. Okay, so work both sides. And leave that space. Don't come all the way up because we want to leave space for the white, shiny, for his legs. All right, then repeat that for the other side. Okay, first legs. Take 2 strands of the silky floss. It's kind of a satiny. And then just work stab stitch everywhere there's white for his legs. Okay, that one's, he's kind of thicker, so come up a little bit above that. Right next to his leg. And then make 1 stitch on his lower leg. And then he's got a little skinny leg. And we could do this in 1, but it sort of angles a little bit, so I'm going to do it in 2. Okay, so that white will be done on all the legs. And then as you can see right here, as I just outlined with white, just took a couple stitches, and then I took black and just filled in his belly right here. So go ahead and do that for that bug. Okay, so let's work on these little owl feathers here. Here's my first one, and I chose to do just some loose long and short stitch, satin stitch on his belly, going from dark to light, incorporating some light into the dark and then kind of the white into his belly. And then here on his wings I just did some sparkly straight yarn. So really anything goes here. I think for this guy, what I want to do is make these feathers, his little wings, kind of stand out. So I'm going to work a split stitch. You know, maybe working within these lines here. Let's take little 1/4 inch stitches, come up halfway into that stitch. Okay. And as you come up in the middle of the stitch, just push it over to follow that curve. Down here. And this is 3 strands of the lighter brown DMC floss. So follow every line, just fill it in like you're coloring, all the way down here, and then these here, and then we'll decide what to do with his belly. Alrighty, now that we got his little outer wings done, basically I'm doing here, I want some of this background color to show through, so I'm just inserting my needle at every point, and then I'm going to make 3 stitches coming down, however it works out. These little waves in his body aren't lined up perfectly, but that's okay. Each row will be a little different. I'll show you what I mean. Okay, so we'll come up to here. And down below where you have another point. down from the bottom of that little swoop. And back up. Go from this point here. And so you can see I'm not being really super careful, just working some stitches, some feathers, some texture in his belly. Not really a rhyme or reason, just connecting. And you know, your owl might look completely different, so these are just some ideas for you to work. Just practice some embroidery stitches and play around with different textures. See, no rules, just the way we like it. Okay, so continue on with that. Okay, so as you can see, I did some lazy daisies in that white satin on his cheek there. I turned him into a horned owl. Might even do a little white highlight here. Finished out all his feathers, and then I took the white and just highlighted some of the bones. You know, just kind of gave this guy some little knuckles. Did some satin stitch on the actual bone, on the pelvis. These little threads that are coming up, the frays, you can just take a really sharp serrated scissor and cut those if they bother you. Or you could even take a tweezers and pull some of these threads, just pull right out. To finish out the owl, I'm just going to work lazy daisies from each point, going up to his chin. So for the background embroidery, I'm going to take 2 strands of an olive DMC floss and work a back stitch. Okay, so a back stitch, I'm just going to kind of start anywhere. Right, and I work it from right to left. If you're left-handed, you may want to work left to right. This is a tiny little stitch. So it's in, talking like 1/8 of an inch here. Go into where you're coming out of, on that top. And where you're going to come out is 1/8 of an inch of where the thread is coming out of here. And that will be your guide for where you're going to insert the needle. Travel underneath where your thread is coming out of. Okay, back in. Out. And just kind of think vines here, you know, just sort of a meandering vines that are working in the back. And let's work one more at that tree there. Okay, and then you can take another we've got a little vine spoking. Just work that vine in a different direction. Okay, so all across the back. And then every so often in the vine, what I did was I did some leaves. A couple of little lazy daisies. Little tiny ones. And I'm going to fill it in just by coming out the V. Into the middle of that. And then maybe make another leaf on the other side. Okay, so work that all through the background. Leave a spot maybe in 1 or 2 places where you can actually do a flower. just a beaded sort of bud flower like I did here, if you want to. All of these, of course, are just options. And then in between each set of leaves, I put a blue bead. So I'll go ahead and work that. And then I'll show you how to put it all together. All right, I think I've got this pretty much filled in. I've got all my vines, a couple little flowers, beads between all the leaves. Bugs are done, almost good. Now it's time to stitch this all together, and it's really simple. Just use a blanket stitch, a size 8 pearl cotton. Come in from the inside. My non-dominant hand, I have this pinched over my finger here, so it's easy to grab. And somewhere between 1/8 and 1/4 of an inch, insert your needle from front to back through both pieces of felt. I've got them pinned wrong sides together. Blanket stitch so that this is coming right out the top again. And again, I hold it here, my finger, 1/8 of an inch in, 1/8 of an inch over, or so. Just try to spread it out as evenly as you can. Straight through. When you get to the corner of your blanket stitch, what I like to do so that this doesn't slide around is just take another little stitch from the back and you're working basically over this thread, and it puts you in the position again to continue. Up the other side. When you run out of thread in a blanket stitch, what I do is tie a knot, come over that thread again, and come through the loop so that a knot is tied. Open up the bag and weave it in to that little messy side. Okay, and then thread a new length of yarn, tie a knot in the end, come up through the mess, and think, where would your thread be had your knot run out? It would be behind this knot. Okay, and then just continue on. All the way to the corner, all the way up the other side, and then I'll show you how to finish out the very top. Okay, the very last step is you take your lining and just fold the top under about 1/4 of an inch. Tuck that into your bag. Okay, so the lining will sit 1/4 of an inch below the bag, the outer part of the bag. So then all you're going to do is tuck that so the seam allowances match each other. Okay, so you just tuck your side, match your lining seam up. Pop a pin in there. Okay, just proceed that all the way around until your whole bag is tucked in and pinned to its seam allowance, and then just do a blind stitch across the top. And all I do to do that is exit the needle out of the top of the lining, take that pin out since we'll be holding it. Directly across from the lining, you pick up a piece of the bag, go about 1/4 of an inch, come out and just pick up a very the top thread or two of the lining. Okay, so it's directly across. Stitch about 1/4 inch. You can see that. And just as you're exiting out of the wool, pick up just a top thread of your bag. And here you have your very easy, fast, one-day project, little mini mess kit pouch. I hope you enjoy it. I know this was a quick little down and dirty, anything goes sort of tutorial, but really was just to give you an idea of some of the great things that you can do with just little bits of beads and yarn and thread that you have left over from other projects. You know, for me, it's just so hard to throw little piles that look like this away. I feel like there's just really a lot of different things that you could do with it. So I save these, and as I come up with ideas, I kind of dig through and use the colors, and I don't know, I just think it's kind of fun. So it's kind of a challenge too to make something utilitarian and beautiful with things that you already have. I really respond to that. So this is the mini mess kit, but in the next couple weeks, I'll be doing a video on the mess kit, kind of a bigger one where we can make monogram bags and things with the scrapplique method that I came up with. So look for those, but until then, happy Halloween. I hope you get lots of candy and lots of stitching done, waiting for those kids to come to the door. And if you're doing the Gypsy Satchel, I will see you on Sunday. Take care.